Hi, this is Alicia with another Heuristic podcast, and today we're talking to Jessica Kozma Proctor. She's the founder and managing director of North State Public Affairs, and she operates at the intersection of government and, what would you say, public relations, PR. You're kind of a PR person. So you're working with nonprofits, businesses, individuals. You do a lot of grassroots work, lobbying, communication strategy work. So that's actually really related to what we want to talk about. But is there anything else you'd like to add about your organization and what you do?
Well, first, it is such a pleasure being with you. You're one of my favorites, and it's always a joy working with you in any capacity. I would only touch on that North State. The impetus of North State came from working in a statewide campaign to provide bricks and mortar funding for all higher education, to build an agricultural life center at NC State and some other things, a couple $1 billion in money. And it rose. I traveled about 2/3 of the state for 8 months pushing the campaign and worked very deeply in the grassroots in North Carolina. And it was one of the most joyous, and we won, so that's the important thing, but it was one of the most joyous experiences of my career to be on the ground, at the Rotaries, at the community college trustee meetings, at these places where with people that actually make the state work. Mm-hmm. So from that, North State was born, and we have tried to remain to be more North Carolina centric, always focused on values, respect, honesty, hard work, and keep it very simple. We understand data, we understand metrics, we understand all those things, but at the end of the day, the virtuous overrides all that. And I think we're going to talk about that and how the virtuous may or may not always fuel heuristics, but we'll get to that. But thank you so much for having me today.
You bet. So the heuristic that we are going to talk about today is, what is it? Prompt grassroots decision making often.
Yes.
And the reason why I bring this up is that very often heads of the business, entrepreneurs are not your most patient folks. And they're like, this is what I want to see. And there's this impetus to try and just sort of like encourage and push the team to do the thing that they can envision. And that ends up turning into very top down. And sometimes they miss what's happening on the front lines or in the middle of the front lines and senior leadership that are going to impact exactly how this thing needs to work. And so that's why, I'm always encouraging them to think, well, let's do some grassroots work. Let's talk to people on the front lines, because they're the ones, like you said, in the public and private sector, the people that make stuff happen, the ones that have really skin in the game in terms of any changes that are made, are the ones you really, really need to talk to. So that's the heuristic. And I guess, maybe we could continue to discuss how that works and plays in your practice.
Well, I think that we have right now a cultural affliction with misapplied heuristics, where, where it can be, you may use a heuristic to be helpful in a mental shortcut. However, today, where you want to see structural changes in businesses and organizations without understanding to navigate the culture and what created that culture, good or bad. And then you end up cracking the culture, and business suffers, policy suffers, employees suffer. Whereas if you take, like you said, if you listen to the ears on the ground, you're going to be able to come to your conclusion and have success much easier, because they are still going to be the ones that are fueling whatever outcome or output you're having in whatever situation it may be.
Yeah. So, I know that, the culture issue is a really good one. And like every once in a while, I'll hear through the grapevine, they're like, I was talking to this business. They're like, we don't have a culture. We're like, yeah, you do.
Yeah, you do. You always have a culture. And I think even having spent a large part of my career in North Carolina politics, I tell clients and other people that the political stances may change, but it is the culture that you have to look at. If you want to win something that you are lobbying for, if you want to make that policy change or get that appropriation, before you play the political deck, know the culture of those whom you're dealing with, and understand them, and don't take objection to it. The people elected them, so learn to work with them, right? But that doesn't mean that you have to agree with them on the budget or abortion or this, that.
Yeah.
It just means that you respect that they're an elected official and you ask them to get done what they're charged to do. We muddy the waters way too much. And in North Carolina, I don't know, I follow other states because I work on pension issues. We culturally, our political culture has gone so unbelievably toxic. And to the point of heuristics, you've got people on the far right saying, if Donald J. Trump isn't reelected, democracy will crumble. And then you've got people on the far left saying, Donald J. Trump is reelected, democracy will crumble, right? So you take the spectrum, tie it together, they're the same people. They just look through a different lens, right? Whereas without putting into context the constructs of our republic, without putting into context the history of this country, without looking at the inspiration of how this country was founded, right? In rejection of an order of a monarchy and overtaxation, and that without trying even to grasp, but it was only that fear that if A, B outcome happens, that somehow this republic that has been the most successful in the world's history is going to crack apart. And I think politically you see that more and more and more. And how COVID and the things that transpired in 2020 have affected fear among people. And I'm sure you know people, one of my dearest friends whom I love dearly locked herself in her house for 1.5 years. Because of that fear, that she reacted much like the heuristic of, oh, someone at Atlantic Beach was bitten by a shark, because that would stick in my mind because I have a child in a home at Atlantic Beach. So I'm thinking, oh, my kid's gonna get bitten by a shark. But really the likelihood of my kid getting bitten by a shark is pretty small, but the event stays in my mind. And I don't know, back to the cultural thing, how that has changed us as a culture, of being afraid of germs, being afraid of other people, being afraid of interactions, being afraid of showing your face. So I'm sorry, I'm digressing.
Well, so I mean, so there's so many different things that I thought of listening to you, and one of them is, I guess there's the fear question, but there's also, I think before we got there, it's the team first. It's almost like, the political arena has become a team sport. And I think probably it's always been that way. I wouldn't know. You've been more involved. I don't get into that stuff. but I think it's gotten more so by maybe a large factor, and maybe it's just the information I'm exposed to is changing, but it turns into whatever my team says is what I believe in. And I can't even engage in a discussion without going back to the team, in terms of my team has to always be right, your team has to always be wrong. And as you know, I mean, I like the whole point of, well, our political apparatus is that like no one side of anything's going to have the truth, and that's going to be true within organizations as well.
And as the pendulum continues to broaden, you are exactly right. And going back to the culture that we are more siloed up and have been for quite a few years. But to the point of the heuristics, what we allow to help us come to the decisions that we do
Mhm.
is also very polarized and hard charged.
Mhm.
You know, I'm a conservative
Mhm.
and I prefer conservative media, right?
Mhm.
Whereas my liberal friend may prefer liberal media. And we both come to very different opinions about things because those are the sources that we seek out.
Mhm.
I do think that if we could take a breath, and I will say this, having been around the legislature for 25 years, we still get along in there,
Mhm.
right? And people still overall get along. You will see the stunts come out, and you will occasionally see some political finesse, overriding a bill suddenly, you know, things like that leadership is
Theater.
skilled to do.
That's what I call it, theater.
It's theater. That's right. It is theater. But on a day-to-day basis,
Mhm.
I will say that, I mean, I know a couple of bad eggs, but I feel like 95% of those who are elected, those who are lobbyists, those who are in the campaign side, are really excellent human beings who are there for the right reasons.
Mhm.
Every basket's going to have a bad apple, but it is not House of Cards. It is not, you know, and I think, again, I digress, but I think one great danger we have is that civics is now taught through Netflix,
Mm.
which also fuels the assumptions that we have heuristically
Mhm.
of that if you're an elected official, you must be inherently corrupt. If you're a
Mm.
lobbyist, you must inherently be a prostitute. I mean, things that just aren't necessarily the truth, but have been exacerbated through popular media.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, I mean, popular media is about the drama, you know, but the real life is usually not that dramatic. I mean, that's what's, you know, so true. I mean, you look on social media and everything looks very polarized, and I think it is very polarized. You know, certainly in many ways. But within any organization, you have a number of people, and they're there together to do something that's, you know, the shared purpose of that organization, whatever it might be. And the other stuff that doesn't contribute to that, it can be helpful in terms of like different people, because what was our another heuristics? You know, more minds, more better, right? You know, because, you know, different perspectives, a variety of views on something is when you collect them together and you coordinate those perspectives and give you something maybe a little bit closer to the truth, you know, fingers crossed, right?
Yes.
And that's true no matter what, whether it's an organization or it's in the broader sphere. But if we look at the grassroots issue is if you get out to the point of where people are doing the stuff and are making things happen, then you have a lot less room for, I think, a lot of conflict in theory.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then, but if you're if you're working with those who are, you know, like in the trenches, the practitioners, there's a lot less room for unfounded theory.
Well, and I think one thing, you're hitting on something that I think is also a very dangerous cultural norm right now, which is where people ignore the grassroots for what they feel like is a enlightened social agenda, right? And
Right.
so, you know, one size fits all, whereas organizations need to stick to their mission. If you serve retirees, if you serve mechanics, I mean, whomever you serve, and you can't fulfill that service unless you are looking at the grassroots.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what drives the members? What do they need at the end of the day? How do we serve them best?
Mm-hmm.
Applying these agendas
Mm-hmm.
on organizations, I think is very cancerous. And ultimately, you know, I always tell clients that we have to look at the end user first,
Mm-hmm.
right? Who are we serving? Who are we helping? And from there, figure it out. We can't tell them. We have to understand them first.
Yeah, my policy didn't work, and the reason my policy didn't work is because those dumb people out there did it wrong.
That's right. bad, right?
Like, no. I was talking about this. I had another conversation with a Austrian economist.
Ooh.
I know. And that's what we talked about that. And yeah, so I mean, I think it's that grassroots. It's like what Thomas Sowell, his book, A Conflict of Visions, which is, I mean, there's like a handful of books where like my brain is opened, and that was one of them. And that's what he talked about. For those who haven't read it, I'll put a link in the notes. But he talks about the difference in sort of like this fundamental vision about how societies and human beings work. On the one hand, we have does it work in the real world and on the ground? And this is like the grassroots idea. What is the reality of what human nature is and how it works, in the face of different policies trying to make certain changes happen. And the other perspective or the other vision is one of, I forget how he frames it, that people are ultimately are infinitely malleable. If we just design things the right way at the top down level, no matter how big our scale, then we'll get the right outcome. And like, this is even assuming that everyone can agree on what the right outcome is, which we cannot. And it is in a very appealing perspective. And especially if you're younger, or when I was younger, I was like, it sure would be nice if we could design things in such a manner where things went right, or more right than they do now. And rather than, if we do this, then we're going to have unintended consequences, because human beings are not all like myself, and are going to engage with the system in a way to game it in ways that we cannot even imagine. And it's not going to turn out the way we like. So how else can we think about this?
Well, and I think you're understanding. I want to use an example in public policy here in North Carolina, and that would be family law.
Okay.
And where this is where we'll talk about divorce. We'll talk about that before custody. But in North Carolina, if you marry someone who refuses to work and sits around the house watching TV all day long, and they have a right to half of everything you have, right? And the law is set up in a painful way. Now, it was set up, of course, to protect housewives who stayed at home and raised the kids while the husband has a midlife crisis and leaves for the secretary, and so the wife needs to get the house and a lump sum and so forth. However, in application, the law has been, and it is a law that is in several states. It's the same as in Maryland. It's the same as in Virginia, a little different in South Carolina. But it negates the goodwill of one spouse versus another. And it is where public policy was crafted, but was not thought through with the end user in mind, and that needed to be changed. And I think there is a trend in public policy where you see that a little more. It's where the state gets into some regulatory issues from time to time. I think the application of the lockdowns, what businesses were deemed essential, proved that it is quite messy. I have a client that the whole association almost went out of business because they were locked down for 6 months, and were not recognized in the unemployment system. So, these are the kind of things from the public policy perspective that we need to really get right. How does a spouse that's in an abusive marriage be able to keep his or her assets? How does a business that needs to be essential compared to another, or not be?
Right.
And that's where, and I really hope and believe in the years to come, as we move out of this pandemic, that we will more thoughtfully address, and I think to some degree we already are, with regard to broadband and some things that rose, but still, I think we're pushed a little more than we have been in the past. We're facing some real problems with our school children. The two demographics that really suffered were of course, the old and the young. that really struggle. And those are two demographics that require a great deal of public policy support, right?
Mhm.
We have to run public schools. We have to provide Medicare. We have to provide services for the elderly and the young, and including mental health. And I hope that as we move forward, that we can, again, go into the grassroots, look at the people whom we really need to serve, and move ahead. Anyway, yes.
I mean, there's a degree of, so I guess there's going grassroots and this, but not with an open mind, right? And and then there's going grassroots and then have an open mind and assuming that you have something really important to learn from these people, out there.
Again, it goes to where I think there can be a tone deafness in those groups. And, let's talk about the elderly and COVID. And you and I both know how important human interaction is. You and I are both pretty extroverted social people, and humans need each other. And so to perpetuate a narrative where grandparents are scared of their grandchildren because it is being said that they're little super spreaders of death. It's a very detrimental, and that is an availability heuristic, right? That sticks, or at least it's stuck. And the long-term damage on both the grandparent and the grandchild, I would dare say, is probably significant, however nuanceable it may be. It may not be overt, but there's a subtlety. And it, I mean, one thing that I found most disturbing, now my daughter was 9, so she still used playgrounds then. And behind my offices at Cameron Village, which you've been to, there was a playground that she used for years, and they taped it up with police tape.
Yeah.
And so what is the nuanceable message? And there is, again, an availability heuristic there, that the children that played there, it looked like someone had been murdered. And so, and
Like
I'm
they're
sorry,
criminals. Yeah.
it's criminal to go use the playground. And I think those things stick. And again, it is being tone deaf, or at least myopic, to the grassroots around you. Because they're prevalent, and they're in every culture, and they're in every situation, and they're in every public policy issue, and they're in every business.
Yeah.
Is that you have those grassroots, and I think it is the most important of all.
Yeah. Yeah, just like the owner of the business that I talked about that has this great idea, and if it works out the way that they want to work, then it works out great for everyone, right? It's coming from a really good place. And I think that that's true with a lot of people. It's like they want things to be safe. They want the most, vulnerable in the population to be protected. These are all really wonderful impulses, and and certainly an expression of our humanity and our desire to be connected and to trust and to be safe with each other. But if we get locked in, then we end up with a blind spot. And I think that's the most effective organizations. And I think you're noticing some things, maybe especially more when you go out in the grassroots and you just have people in the field working with each other. There's more possibility to hear beyond the blind spots.
Well, having a history, there are only a couple of electives that I do campaigns for anymore, but I've moved out of that more into public affairs. But having a campaign passed, one of the things, if I had a candidate come and want me to consult their campaign, first thing I want to do is meet their spouse, because you can learn a lot from there. Second thing I ask them is if they're willing to walk door to door, because no matter how much digital I can buy, no matter how much radio I can buy, no matter how much any of that, if they're not willing to walk door to door and know the grassroots, if they're not willing to work in that realm, they don't need to be elected. And one beauty about our system is that there is sometimes where it works, it will weed itself out. And candidates that just want to buy digital and they want to do that and depend on the metrics and all that stuff. When really, if you look at it through a lens that has a little more finesse, you control the data, right? You can control the narrative, but reaching that voter, you will have a supporter for as long as you're in office. But that is being in the grassroots and all the other stuff. When you see like, if you look at the last cycle, the lieutenant governor's race was very interesting. You had 2 African-American candidates for the first time since Reconstruction. And you had a very charismatic Republican with an enormously conservative narrative and an elected official with a community history and a grassroots history. But she ignored that. She didn't talk about advocating for hunger in poor Black neighborhoods. She didn't talk about working in affordable housing. She bought the national narrative. Michael Bloomberg, meanwhile, the Republican candidate worked the grassroots. He's talking at a home in Pink Hill, and he's going to Garner, and he's going here and there. Michael Bloomberg came in at the end of this race and put over $10 million into TV for the Democratic candidate. Republican candidate, meanwhile, again, both African-American, sharing a very personal narrative, had no real money, and he won. Because Robinson, the Republican candidate, stayed in the grassroots, stayed on message, and stayed focused on North Carolina. Whereas Siobhan, I know both of them, and I think the world of both of them, she thought that they could buy their way. And although she had the qualities and the personal richness to share that she had been a public servant and a servant leader, she made the mistake of thinking that the buy would buy her the win, get her the win, and it didn't. And I think that's a fine example of where you see how important grassroots is, and however you want to apply it in a business world, because at the end of the day, we're all campaigning for something.
Yeah. Always persuading. That's what I say. It's always we're selling. That's why I tell the consultants that work with me. It's like, no, you're not in sales, but you're always in sales. You're selling at least an idea or a way of thinking or of tackling an issue.
You know, I'm so glad you said that, because when I was preparing for this, I was occasionally somebody will call wanting me to help them find a job. And half the time they go, well, I don't sell. And I'm like, we all sell
you do.
every day. We're selling our business, we're selling our talents, we're selling our skills, we're selling our wisdom, however we need to do it. And that's a good thing. You know, that allows us to be competitive and healthy. And I mean, I think that one thing I've always, you know, like when I was doing campaigns, you always want opposition.
Well, you want to be challenged. I mean, like, I mean, I think people don't like sales because it sounds like trying to convince somebody else to do something they don't want to do. And I think that's where things get all twisted up. But no, I mean, you know, what is really sales? Sales is actually conveying the thing with authenticity that you can do for that other person.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, this has been fantastic, and you know, and it maybe it's just me, but I like talking. As I mentioned, I talked to an economist who runs an entrepreneurial group at a university, you know, as well as senior leaders, as well as HR people, as well as you know, running the gamut. I love hearing, you know, some of the stories that you shared, and I think it would be really instructive, you know, for people who are in business or run nonprofit organizations. You know, really listening and being in touch with what's going on in terms of where are you creating the value and for whom, and how can you say it in a way where the for whom feels heard.
Yes, absolutely. You know, and I know we got to close. But if we could just simplify how we do many things and look at that end user, I think we could find things a lot more pleasant and easier to achieve. I don't think it needs to be as complicated as society seems to think it is anymore.
Yeah. I mean, Yes.
Well, I appreciate you very much.
I appreciate you. Thank you, Jessica.
Anytime, it's been an honor, and anytime I can help, let me know.
All right, you bet.
Thank you.